I was born in 1942 during the Second World War. I don't remember much about it, but it has some similarities to things that are happening in the world today. There were bombs were being dropped on my hometown, Sheffield, in Yorkshire, in the north of England, by the Luftwaffe. I remember very little about it, but there were air raid shelters at the bottom of the garden, and when the sirens went, we had to dive into the air raid shelter. I think I began to remember things about 3 years later, and I used to go and play in the shelter, and we would imagine what had happened. Anyway, it's quite strange, isn't it, that all those years later, the same thing is happening in Gaza Strip and in the Ukraine. People are being displaced, and there's a war going on again. William Liv. It featured work by Tay King Soon. It featured work by the Malayan architect who worked in Singapore, Tan Guan Bi, and it was my way of getting to know architecture in Singapore. Then I wrote this book, Living Legacy, on behalf of the Singapore Heritage Society. Now, Willie Lim was the person who set up the Heritage Society in Singapore. So this book was the first book about conservation. And then, much later, it gets out of sequence here a little bit, but I wrote this book on the Singapore Good Class Bungalow, the designation of areas in Singapore to be conserved because of they were part of the Good Class Bungalow. And in year 2000, I went back into practice. I worked for Ken Yang in London, in his London office, and I worked in Saudi Arabia, in Dubai, in Libya, in Hong Kong, in India, and so on. All outstationed but centered in London. And I was there for some years until in 2016 I returned here to Malaya. I have some connections there. When I was in Singapore, I met a young student. Shouldn't say this really because I was quite an elderly lecturer by then. But we married, and I married to a Ceylonese Malaysian in 1990. We have a lovely daughter, 31 years old now. But we were together for many years. So coming back to Malaysia, I already knew something of Malaya, and I already knew something of the of Kuala Lumpur. In 2023, I was offered an opportunity to write a book on the origin and evolution of the Malayan Shophouse. The opportunity was given to me by an Indian venture capitalist called Bramal Vasudevan, and Bramal Vasudevan had acquired number 2, Medan Pasar. He was starting to renovate it, and it gradually acquired many other shop houses in Medan Pasar and the High Street. Until today, I think he owns more than about 40 shop houses, and several of them in Medan Pasar are being developed at this very moment. Numbers 11, 13, 15, numbers 12, 14, 16, 18, numbers 2, 4, and 6 are all if you walk into Medan Pasar now, you'll see the scaffolding up and all are being renovated at the moment. But Ramo in 2023 invited me he said, we're doing a book, we're doing a number 2 Medan Pasar. It used to be called Sin Seng Nam, to the older members of the audience will remember Sin Seng Nam. And he said, I would like a book doing about the shop house, the development of the shop house, not just in Kuala Lumpur, but in Malaysia. 1962, 1794 in Malacca, and 1962 in Chinatown, Kuala Lumpur. There's that period during of Malayan shop houses, and he insisted I should have the title should be The Origin and Evolution of the Malayan Shop House. And then the president of ECOMAS said, I agree, that's what it should be. So that's why you have the title Malayan Shop Houses. when I started the book, I was under the impression that shophouses came essentially from China, and that they were brought by the migrants from China, mainly from the provinces of Guangdong and Fujian. And so I began to question my friends and colleagues, David Tafer, one of them, who knew a little of the history of the shophouse. Where did they come from? And everyone pointed me in that direction, but no one could actually pinpoint anything that remained of the older shophouses. And eventually, I finished up identifying shophouses in Suzhou. And I went off to Suzhou to try and find the old shophouses, or examples of the old shophouses. This, of course, is the way most Chinese migrants got to this part of the world, to Nanyang, by junks sailing very hazardous journeys from southern China to Nanyang. And you have to remember that China went through a period. There was the Taiping Rebellion in 1850, the First and Second Opium Wars in 1839 to 1860, the Boxer Rebellion in 1899, the fall of the Qing Dynasty in 1921, and this caused millions of Chinese to migrate from the southern provinces of mainland China to Nanyang, the South Seas, the Southern Seas. So it's not actually Suzhou. I can't pronounce this name. Probably you can pronounce it for me. But when I went to Suzhou, I found that most of the shophouses that I saw there they'd been gentrified. They'd been adapted for tourists to come. This is a place about 30 kilometers to the southeast of Suzhou. Zhuzhou, something like that. I'm very bad with my pronunciation. But this is what I found. There were long, narrow shophouses, and this was a familiar sight to me. Every evening and every morning, planks were taken out of the front of the shophouse. They were put there in the evening, they were taken away in the morning. The planks were lifted out, and this is the way you gave security to the shophouse. I'd seen that in Singapore. I saw it in parts of Malaya, even much later. But this made these sort of connections between the old shophouse and the current shophouse convinced me that this was right. This is where actually the shophouse had come from. The idea that you lived over the top of the shophouse. Your washing was hanging out, your laundry was hanging out outside the window, whilst the business went on downstairs. And again here in the same place. And here the sort of details for natural ventilation and using timber as a cladding material. You'll find in my book that I'm a great one for timelines and for putting different incidents into perspective. Traces, key dates and personalities in the colonial government, because that influx of Chinese migrants also coincided with the British colonial government taking over Malayan. Some of the characters and the dates, like Hugh Lowe and Captain Blomfield Douglas and Raffles and Swettenham and Francis Light, and put them all into their time slot in Malacca, in Penang, in Singapore, in Perak, in Cochin, and in Kuala Lumpur. And you get a period when most of the shophouses were built. It started around 1794 here, with shophouses with a Dutch influence in Malacca. It began and sort of progressed through the whole of this period here, and it ended virtually in 1962. In the book, I have a shop house in Battalion Street in 1962, and in the book I have a shop house in Malacca in 1794. So that's the period when most of these all of these shop houses were basically. And these were some of the British officials that were involved in that. Also, I consulted the maps that were produced at the time. Most of the maps were produced by colonial surveyors. So that here you had the Jackson Plan for Singapore, and the separation of different racial groups in the way that the colonial government planned their settlements. Here you have the Popham Plan of Penang. Again, an orthogonal. Most of these surveyors had a military background, and they laid things out in an orthogonal pattern. So there you had very much an orthogonal plan by Lieutenant Jackson, here by a naval surveyor, Popham, and here the layout of Malacca called the Heist Plan, I think it's called. And then, but Kuala Lumpur was somewhat different in that it's much more organic plan. It didn't have a master plan. It sort of grew up from here, the Old Market Square. It extended in a linear fashion to the north and to the south. So quite different in Kuala Lumpur. But I looked at the plans of the cities. Another timeline. Some very influential people, the Capitan China. And again, I thought it interesting to see the period when Capitan China were functioning in the various cities in Malacca, starting here in Malacca. So that when you're looking at the shop house in Malaya, there's been a tendency for writers on the subject to use one timeline for a city or for a particular movement, like sorry, where's it gone? But they never happened simultaneously. You see how the distribution slopes in. It starts earlier in Malacca, and it ends here in Kuala Lumpur. There's 100 years difference. So this interested me to examine some of the Capitan China. Ko Le Hun, the first Capitan of Penang. Chung Keng Kui, the second Capitan of Perak, happened to be architect Ken Yang's great-grandfather. Was the and then Yapaloi here, Yapaloi in Kuala Lumpur. The Chinese entrepreneurs who also became quite were important in the development of shop houses. So against that background, I now had another question in my mind. The 5-foot way. Where did the 5-foot way come from? There's a book by John Lim, Dr. John Lim in Penang, which on the Shophouse Rafflesia, and it sees the 5-foot way coming from Batavia, and it's a Stanford Raffles, or Stanford Raffles he was then. Actually saw this when he was the governor of Java, and he was in the governor of Java from 1811 to 1815. and it was John's assertion that he discovered, or he'd seen the 5 foot way there, and when Lieutenant Jackson wrote the plan of, or produced the plan of Singapore, Raffles added an addendum to this saying there should be a 5 foot way in front of all the shop houses, making a connection, which was protection from the sun and protection from rain, from monsoon rain. I always had a bit of a doubt about that. I wanted to investigate whether that was the case, and I came across a very interesting book. Sorry, this was Batavia. The reason I was skeptical about whether the 5 foot way came from Batavia is that in Batavia there wasn't a continuous 5 foot way. There were verandas in front of shop houses. Here you see verandas in front of shop houses. This was the Dutch way of doing it. They had, and it's what was transferred to Malacca. There were verandas in front of shop houses. This is still there in Batavia. This is gone. But I walked around the streets of Batavia. I could see evidence still of where there was a covered way, but it was not an arcaded 5 foot way. So my thought was, where then did it come from? Now I came across an interesting book, as I say. This book, I suppose some of you may know it, Raffles of the Eastern Isles. I went back to UK for summer, it was either last year or 2 years ago, and then it was on my desk. And why the earth I left it there, I didn't know. Good Lord. And I leafed through it, and I found that Raffles, after he'd been governor of Java from 1811 to 1815, he was recalled to London. Can you imagine? Come back, man. There's some anomalies in the books. We can't balance the financial books that he's presented. Somebody's been fiddling the books, and Raffles was called back to explain it. Well, he managed to. He sailed back. It took him 4 months to get back to England, and he explained what everything in the book, and he vindicated himself. So they gave him a knighthood. He became Sir Stafford Raffles. They sent him back to Asia, but they put him on the southwestern side of Sumatra at Bencoolen. They gave him Bencoolen, but Raffles wanted to. He's always wanted to create a new port. He was looking towards Singapore, and he persuaded the governors in Calcutta that they should have a port, a new port in Singapore. So, but that period when Raffles was called back to London is actually quite interesting. He was called back. Just one moment, got to get the dates right here. So, I'll have to read from this one. In 1916, after Raffles had served as Lieutenant Governor of Java, he was recalled to London for some charges of financial impropriety. When he got to London, he lived at number 23 Berners Street in Fitzrovia. That's just off the Tottenham Court Road as it is now. And when I was working for Kenya, his office was in just off the Tottenham Court Road. And I realized I actually knew where Raffles had lived all those many years ago, and I went back to see it. And I realized that, because Raffles stayed in London for almost 2 years while he was vindicating himself. And he used to go to the opera in Covent Garden. It's 15 minutes walk away. And I realized he didn't get it from Batavia. He got it from Covent Garden. And here you can see today the arcades in Covent Garden. Here, walking along. I was there just 18 months ago, 2 years ago. people using the arcade. He actually got it from Covent Garden. He didn't get it from Batavia. And where did the designs of Covent Garden come from? Well, in those days, the done thing for all architects was to go on the grand tour. In your education, you went to Venice, you went to Florence, you went to the Doge's Palace, and there were arcades there. And the architects of Covent Garden actually got it from Venice and from Florence. And Raffles picked it up, and that's why you see, in my opinion, that's why you see 5 foot way in Malaysia today, in Singapore, and so on. It makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense to me anyway, rather than that he got it from Batavia, which is actually closed verandas without a continuous 5 foot way. So this was a second discovery, if you like, in the whole process. So with those issues involved, I moved on to looking at the Shophouse plans, looking at the, see every one of these has a 5 foot way, these plans. The 5 foot way is an integral part of the design. And I determined that I would draw, so this is probably the best example you'll find of the morphology that results from the shophouses being used. And this is an aerial view of Heron Street in Malacca, Heron Street here, and Jonker Street just here. So yeah, I say I determined I'd go and draw. I visited 7 cities in Malaysia, and that's starting with Malacca, Penang, Taipei, Kuching, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur. And I would draw 10 shophouses in each of the cities. So I was going to get 70 drawings, and I would try to get into all of these 70 shophouses. In fact, I managed to get into about 60% of them. Others were, for one reason or another, I couldn't get into. But this one is a house owned by Lim Pei Chai, architect here in Kuala Lumpur. And Pei Chai was brought up in this shop house. His grandparents had a shop there. As a child, he lived there. He went off to do his degree in London, came back, and he's now restored it. And you enter from the main street here, or you can go in you go through and you come to the riverfront, and you can come out of his house and stand on the riverfront. So here are the shophouses of Malacca. This is Lim Pei Chai's house. This is a wonderful, wonderful kopitiam here. I can't say it, but it's a traditional business. It's making rattan furniture and storing rattan furniture. Here's the press building. Here is the Baboon House. Here is probably this is the oldest shop house in the book. This is number 6 and 8 in Heron Street. It's the oldest shop house that I could find, and it's very much influenced by the Dutch from Batavia. You see, there's a veranda at the front, but there's no continuous 5 foot way, and there's a veranda in front here. And others here, there's this one here is the School of Architecture at National University of Singapore. It's their shop house for investigating Asian architecture. So there's there are the shop houses of Malacca. Then again go to Penang, and the Shophouse of Penang were recorded here. Gosh, my memory is defeated. This is China House, known for its great length. One of the longest shop houses we visited. There's a small shop house, a barber shop, Art Deco shop house, now a Japanese restaurant. This is a famous shop house. It's the shop house where the final speech was given before the 1912 overthrow of the Chun-Gil government in China. So I found what was so interesting to me is that each shop house had a story to tell. You learned something about every shop house you went to, and this one was the. Oh God, sorry, give me a moment. I say, yeah, it's East India Mansions and China House and Wabi Barbers, the Sun Yat-sen Museum. That's right, this one on there, sorry. This is Sun Yat-sen Museum, and owned by Kusama now. But you go there and you get all the feeling of what of the Chinese Revolution, and it enfolds you. You cannot deny. You stand there. Wow, this is where they all met and decided to overthrow the Qing dynasty. Wonderful. I went to Singapore again. Interesting shop houses. This one is the office of the Penang-born architect Chan Soo Kian, SCDA Architects, now an internationally famous architectural practice with buildings in Tokyo, buildings in New York, on the High Line in New York. So that's Soo Kian. There's a Betian Street, a whole lot of area of Singapore which is named after battles and generals in the First World War. Here's the very first shop house that was restored in Chinatown. It's in Lee Kuan Yew's constituency. It's a tea shop. And then others like this Madame Ouz. It's one of these strange new buildings, which is a capsule hotel. A capsule hotel. I never knew capsule hotels existed. But there, you could go and hire a place and pull a curtain across and stay there for the night in a small capsule. So that's another new form of living. And then this one, the working capital. The working capital has taken over many old shop houses in Singapore, which formerly where the upper floors were derelict, and now there are many start-up businesses in the upper floor of the shop houses. In Arab Street, a restored building selling perfumes from the Middle East. So say every shop house has a story to tell. And this is the way I record it. I write and I draw, and somewhere circulating around the room is this book, which shows you the way that I write a book. I'm not saying it's everybody would do it this way, but it's the way I do it, old-fashioned way, I guess, that you write a diary, a log of your progress. This is to Perak and to shop houses in here. Shop houses began to express something of the some Egyptian hieroglyphics and decoration. This is when the tomb of Tutankhamun was opened, and the Suez Canal was created. And you get shops like this, which was a famous bookshop. I went to the town of Papan, an old mining town, and the house of a famous nurse during the war, when the nurse treated guerrilla warfare who were fighting against the Japanese, and they would come down to her surgery for medical care. So here, and then we moved into the 19th century, the first Durbar of the rulers of the states that formed the Federated Malay States, with its headquarters in Kuala Lumpur, which the Sultan of Perak was never very happy about. He wanted it to be in Taipei, but Switzerland decreed that it would be in Kuala Lumpur. We go to Kuching. Somehow Kuching seemed to be out of the mainstream of all these things that were happening on mainland China. But they're very simple shop houses in the main, but also interesting for all those reasons. And Kuching then, maybe it was and finally to Kuala Lumpur, walking the streets of Kuala Lumpur, light captured. Of course, it's all changed, isn't it? I mean, there's steel windows here now. There would have been shutters on these windows. But there's a great fire here. And if you've been in light capture, you'll find that all of this part of the interior has been, was burnt out. This floor was burnt out here. But it's still left as it is. And there's a wonderful cathedral-like space inside this shop house. And I always worry a little bit that when I go in there, I think, where's the fire exit? I'm not sure they've got a proper fire exit in this place, but it's a wonderful place. I usually sit somewhere near the entrance or exit. This is what used to be a pharmacy, and it's now a textile store. The pharmacy was by the famous pharmacist who started his business in Perak, Gopeng. Started it in Gopeng, and it built up a international chain of pharmacies. And it's now, as I say, it's a textile store. This is where, in some respects, my whole expedition started. Rambo Vasudevan directed me towards this building, which used to be Sin Seng Nam, a restaurant. He bought this, and it's now been restored. It opened about 4 weeks ago. It's not quite Sing Seng Nam as it was. It's now a bakery, but the interior design is a little bit like Sing Seng Nam. Well, actually, it's not at all like Sing Seng Nam. David Tay shaking his head. It's not at all like. Before it had white tiles, and it had kopitiam tables and so on. Now it's updated, but it's very popular, and that I guess was the criteria. And various other places, you'll pass them. Timothy's here in a restaurant in the High Street, and it's one of the few buildings which, if you go across the road and look back at Timothy, it's actually got on the gable wall, it's got a gable which is a symbol of fire, Chinese symbol of fire. There are very few left in Kuala Lumpur. I can only think of 2 which have got gables which are still intact. Actually, no. John, you're just doing one. She's not taking it down. John, so you're just doing a shop house at the moment, which has got a Chinese gable on it. It's in Libo Ampang.
No. Klein Street. Old name was Klein Street, not Jalan Lekki.
And it's got a symbol like this on the gable.
Yeah, Jalan Lekki.
Yeah, but anyway, this is one of the few other shop houses, which has got a Chinese gable to it. And you've got, a variety, all of them telling stories. This one, a 1913, but it's got a Chettiar restaurant in it now. There's a part of the book which I devoted to the individual, the sort of features of a shop house, the internal light, the spiral staircase, the resplendent door that you enter through, some of the specific where broken pieces of ceramic are put into plaster above the door. These symbols here, the twin peacocks, I actually bought some of these tiles for my daughter. She's got them in her London apartment now. Twin peacocks were very famous. This is the sort of gable decoration that you find. There are 5 different types. And then the 5-foot way in Singapore. Now comes to what I think was the most important part of the whole exercise, where I tried to compare what was happening in 7 different cities in Malaya, starting with 1794 here in Malacca, number 8, Heron Street. And then the East India Mansion here in the early part of the 20th century in Penang. And then, not all the dates are accurate. I have to admit to this. I couldn't find the dates in some cases. But you can see how it begins to happen far earlier in Malacca than elsewhere. And then as you progress, you get all the shop houses happening in Kuala Lumpur in this period here, mainly from the 1950s, but of course 1950s, because there wasn't a Malaya, there wasn't a Kuala Lumpur before 1857. So it starts to happen in 1857, and the last one I recorded in Kuala Lumpur was a coffee shop. Where are we? Here. There's a coffee shop here. Singapore. Yeah. Here we are. This one here. And I can't read that. So, but it's Chocha Food. It's owned by an architect, 2 architects. It's owned by 2 architects. It's in the book anyway. All right. So this I thought was the most important bit of my research, that I made a comparative study of the evolution of the shop house. This is the one we finished with. When we got to this point, the idea was we would put this into the book and the book would end there. But it so happened that when the book was published, this still wasn't finished. So my sponsor, Pranal Vasudevan, and his wife, Shanti Kandia, said we'll have to do another book. So we've started another book on Medan Pasar. We're laying out the 5th chapter of it now, and it's a damned interesting book because there's so many stories as well to tell about where did Kuala Lumpur come from, who was the founder of Kuala Lumpur. Wow, I found out things I didn't know before, and some things I think that some of you will not have investigated. So what is the purpose of all this? Well, here we have some of the purpose of the book is not simply to reveal the future. It's linked to city resilience, the idea that cities can reinvent themselves. The shop houses can be recycled. The existing fabric can be recycled. It can drive the circular economy. It's about memory, preservation of a nation's history. And we're all guilty of not just losing memory, but purposefully creating amnesia. Forgetting because we want to forget. Forgetting because it's politically convenient to forget. But it's about memory. It's about walkability. If you go to Putrajaya, you can walk nowhere. But in the center of Chinatown, You can walk everywhere, and it's a wonderful feeling to be able to negotiate the centre of the city. And it's about placemaking, the creation of nodes of activity, what are called third places in the city. A place somewhere between home and the office, a place where you can meet people, where you can have a coffee, you can have lunch or whatever. A third place where you recognize when you go in. I go into a place called I go to a place in the High Street. I really am getting very bad with that. But I go, and when I go in, they say, "Oh, Mr. Powell, we know what you want," and you don't have to ask because you know, and that's what a third place is about, really. They're ready. They've got your favorite drink on the bar if you go into a bar and so on. So it's about third place. It's about. These are some of the people that helped me do it. There's Brahma Basu David here. There's Dr. Tan, who is my publisher. Indra Sadhu has passed away. These are the book designer, Alex Chu, and Shalini is assistant. This is the forum. This is a typical site meeting or meeting on the progress of the book. This is Dr. Camelia Kusumo, who is now the head of school at Taylor's University, our School of Architecture. She's produced a very nice book about the 5 Foot Way. This is the photographer, Lynn Ho. This is the manager of Selena, the manager of the Atelier Publishing. This is wonderful young lady, Scarlett Kuhn, who is just graduated from UCSI, I think last year, as an architect, but she's a great writer as well. She's a great researcher. This is 2 of the young people. This at Atelier International. This is a friend of mine in Batavia, who guided me around Batavia. And this is my daughter, my little girl. I say she's little. I only think of her as little, but she's 31 years old now. And I tell this story, I'm afraid, every time, but it's an interesting story for me, I think. But when she was born in 1993, my wife was a Ceylonese Malaysian, decided she was not going to watch television. We decided she would read books, not watch television at all. So she didn't watch television. You see so many youngsters sitting in front of the box like this, watching cartoons, talking incoherently. Well, Zara read books. She went to university. She graduated from SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies. Then she took a job. What did she do? She joined a television company. And she's now a producer director of television. But she still reads, and she feeds me books. She reads, and my reading is governed by what my daughter sent me. Sally Rooney, Intermezzo, brilliant book. And this one here, Anandati Roy. Actually, most of them are female writers, but it influences the way I write. I don't write like an academic. I don't write in this way. What I want to write is a postmodern novel. I want to dive in, dive out, dive in, dive out. To make stories about this, to make it, in that sense, to make the job. So this young lady is the one who guides me, and she'll say, "No, Papa, yes, Papa, right, do it this way, Papa." Anyway, there we are. Thank you very much indeed.
Round of applause. Many of you will already know him, Prof. Powell.